Peaches, Thomas Clifford. Thomas Clifford, Peaches Vizzio.
Hello. Hi.
How are you?
Great. How are you?
Very good, thank you.
Thomas, you want to give us a little of your Kung Fu background?
Sure. I guess I started doing Chinese martial arts in 1980, 81 with Ruben Pret. He actually trained with Alan Lee, or really he trained with Sidney Austin, who was a direct student of Alan Lee's. He also trained with Pete Chima, Frank DiMaria, under John McSweeney in Kempo. But in 79, 80, and 81, actually it was 78, 79, and 80, they went to Taipei, Taiwan, and they trained with Chung Beng Shang, who was a Swai Jiao master, Chinese wrestling master. So anyway, I spent probably the first decade of my training with Ruben Pret. And then I trained with Tom Bizzio, who was a sort of training partner of Ruben Pret's in Xingyi Bagua and Taiji. And I did some other Chinese martial arts along the way. I trained with David and Stephen Lee in Hungga. They're under Chu Chi Ling.
Thomas, how many times have you been to China?
5 times.
5 times.
Yeah.
Did you go there to train with the same person?
Well,
Did you
originally,
have one teacher there?
I ended up training predominantly with one instructor after the 3rd trip. But the first 2 trips were just, trying to really build relationships, find out, where to train, who we can train with, what the opportunities were. But by the 3rd trip, I started training with Zhang Kai under the Sanghuang Pouchwei lineage, which is it's an art that's related to Baji Chuan. It's a northern Shaolin system. Mm-hmm. So I studied with him my 3rd, 4th, and 5th trip. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's most of what I've practiced in the Chinese martial arts.
Peaches, I for sure know your lineage. My dad. But can you take us through a little bit of your martial art lineage?
Yeah, it's super short. Super short. So I trained under my dad. You guys know Sifu Paul Vizzio, who trained directly under Grandmaster Wei Hung. And that's kind of it.
Yeah.
That's Fu Jiao Pai. His instructor was Wan Lun Toi. And it goes back to Wang Behong and all those movies that you hear about Wang Behong. That's the direct lineage. Mm-hmm. So Wang Lun Toi practiced under Wang Behong.
Mm-hmm. But do you consider Wei Hong now your direct teacher as well, or is that kind of inappropriate to say because your dad is your? It's
inappropriate. Yeah. I do practice. Of course, I go and see him. He is like a grandpa to me. And I go and practice with him. I go and train with him in Chinatown all the time. Yeah. As much as I can. But my Sifu is my father.
Yeah. And then also, though, like your uncle is Mr. Miyazaki, right? So that's part of
my godfather.
Your godfather, right?
Yeah.
So that's like you're part of your martial art lineage as well, right?
Oh, absolutely. So yeah. So although it's not something that like my father, we never say that we are karate people because we are kung fu people. But yes, of course, Sensei Miyazaki is my godfather. It's my father's best friend, and I've trained with him since I could walk.
We went to Japan together to get our 6th degree black belts together. It's something that, whatever. Listen, it's something that I will cherish for my entire life. And what an experience that was. It was really amazing.
Yeah.
Um, I think Thomas knows this story, but the first time I met your dad was at the Tokutai Dojo, and I was 18 years old, and I got there early, and I thought I was doing a good thing by getting there early, but I got there too early. And I was like the noon class, I think I got there like 11:15, and the noon class didn't start for 45 minutes, and your dad was behind the counter, and I knew who he was, but I never met him because he was so notorious in the Miyazaki organization. And I walked in and I bowed, and he said, "Can I help you?" And I said, "I'm here for the noon class." And he screamed at me, "You're too early." And I guess he was cleaning or something. And he said to me, there's a pizza store down the block. You look like a pizza boy. Go get a slice of pizza and come back in 45 minutes. And I was dumbfounded. I was like, I couldn't. And the mental test began the moment I met him. It did. And so the reason I brought that up is in that moment, I could have never imagined traveling to Japan with you, your family, and Sifu, and having that experience. And it was just beautiful. It was really the pinnacle of my martial art experience. So, well, I'm going to introduce everybody, and then we'll get to the topic. And welcome everyone to the Gentle Art Podcast with Gene Dunn. Everybody's been calling me the Jiu-Jitsu Santa these days, so I guess the beard and the tree, I'll take it. We're sitting today with Peaches Vizzio and Thomas Clifford, and continuing our Dojo Series. Welcome, everybody. Welcome. Nice to have you. And our topic came out of an experience that Mrs. Vizzio and I had recently. A student had called her up and wanted to go, well, student/classmate. She was my student or our student at the Jiu-Jitsu school, and your classmate because you train with her at the Jiu-Jitsu school, but she wanted to visit and train Kung Fu. And you had reached out to me and you had said, "Is it okay?" And I said, "Of course it's okay, thank you. Why didn't the student ask?" And you said, "Well, they don't know." And what you're referring to is kind of a little bit more of a traditional protocol. And we thought it might be interesting to start to discuss what are some of the traditional protocols from the student's perspective, and then maybe from the instructor's perspective, for anyone interested in knowing a kind of deeper dive into the martial arts and kind of the dojo or the Kung Fu school and its kind of more secret or less talked about aspects. So, Peaches?
Okay, well, first, I just want to touch on this particular student. They, truly unaware. I did speak to the student about it, and like in just conversation, I didn't want her to feel that, that she was so in trouble or wrong. She was unaware, of the protocol. And talking to her, we discussed that she had gone away on vacation, and she thought it would be cool, to go and practice while she was where she was in another state. And when she posted pictures, and she had no intention of, she was only visiting, she had no intention of staying there. She was coming back to the dojo as normal and, didn't think anything of it. She posted pictures, and other classmates apparently were like, "Oh, you're not allowed to do that. You can't do that," blah, blah, blah. And she was like, "Oh my God, let me take down my picture. I didn't mean to do wrong." Mm-hmm. And she said that she since then felt like, "Oh my God, I can't do anything." But then because it was a different martial art, she thought, okay, and I'm like, okay, nobody's in trouble. I did speak to your instructor, but always go to your instructor. So and in another instance, another classmate asked me for private lessons, and I said, "Well, did you talk to your Shihan?" And they were like, "Why do I have to talk to Shihan? I'm talking to you." And it's like, well, okay, well, there is an etiquette to follow,
Mhm.
you know? One of the most, um, well, respect being the most important, but one of the most important things in martial arts training is loyalty, right? And like I said before, I'll never say that I'm karateka, right? I'm not, I just happen to go and practice with my godfather once in a while, but what I do there is my kung fu. I just translate it into karate. Same thing when I go to your jujitsu class. Of course, I ask my dad for permission first. Can I go practice with my brother? And he's like, yeah, get out of here. He still makes fun of me to this day. He calls me chop suey because I go and I practice with sensei and I go and I train with you. Um, but, I always ask permission. And same thing, I would never say that I am like a jujitsu person. I'm a kung fu person. My Sifu is Sifu Vizzio, and that's it. Do I go and play with my family? Absolutely. But the etiquette, even for me, and it's my dad, is that I have to ask permission because my loyalty is to Fujao, is to my dad.
You know, I remember very early on, well, I came from that environment, right? It was, I made a lot of mistakes coming up and I put my foot in a lot of holes. And I think that I damaged the relationships, not permanently, but I had damaged some of the relationships coming up. And I remember like learning those lessons the hard way. And when I came through jujitsu, like my generation, the first generation really of Americans, beyond Craig Kukuk and what was going on in the garage in Torrance, that I think that they were trying to break away from the martial art protocol and etiquette and all of the stuff that kind of they felt boxed karate, taekwondo, kung fu in. And so there was not a lot of that. And the Gracies did not bring that with them, right? They didn't bring the etiquette of judo or Japanese martial arts with them. And so, the subsequent generations, they weren't indoctrinated. And but I was. And so like I have this dojo, I had these schools that, I wasn't realizing that people were like, there was no context for this martial art protocol with this new generation of practitioners or athletes almost, right? And so like I was trying to kind of go like, no, this is the way. You got to do it this way. And sometimes I was not very nice about it, right? And and there was no like social proof. Anytime a student looked around and they saw their jujitsu schools or they saw their other places, MMA gyms starting to arise, like there was no protocol in those facilities, but there was no social evidence. So like I was like I was like this, I don't know what, like dinosaur, if you will. And so now I think people are kind of, they're understanding that to have a sustainable practice, to have a school that there needs to be some protocols in place. Otherwise, it's a free-for-all and it just can't last. What are some of the kind of protocols that you instill in your students?
So I don't know if you remember, and I'm sorry, I'm always gonna add some kind of little anecdote to this because I think it's hysterical. But especially like in our day and age and the kind of people that we are, we are social and we are, we grew up in the dojo in the kun, so we are constantly around people and we love everybody and but if you remember back in the day in 38th Street, Or did you come in to 34th? I don't remember. I think you started in 34th.
Bergen line. I started on
I
Bergen
know,
line.
but which one? 34th or 38th? The
Second,
big, beautiful school?
the big one.
Big one. Okay, yeah. So the one before that. So 38th Street was the one before that. And my father was at his strictest, believe it or not, back then. Now we're
Yeah.
talking late 70s, early 80s for that school. That was his second location. And he was like insane. And Mr. Meshi, one of our longest practicing students, will tell you that the stories are like insane. But something that I like to instill in the students now still reflects on that, just not as strict as my dad was. So back then, my father used to only allow you to come to class a few minutes before because this is not a social gathering. You come to train, you know? So he would come and you would come right before class, like a few minutes before class, about 10, 15 minutes at most, because you weren't supposed to hang out. You would go in the changing room, change, get on the mat and start stretching, you know? He would hide in his office, like behind, he had a curtain, like a divider, like a room divider.
Yeah.
And he would sit back there because you're not supposed to come and hang out with your instructor. That's not the relationship. That's not your best friend. You know, that's not, you know, the relationship is instructor student, you know. So he would go back there and he would hang out, and right before class starts, he would come out and he would start the class, and that was that, you know. And then when class was over, you would bow out. He would go back to that hiding spot of his, and your responsibility was to clean the school, get changed, and get out.
Mhm.
You know, and that's just what it was. So although I am not like that, you know, like don't talk to me, you know, kind of thing, I do try to stay away from the social gatherings and things like that with students. With my students, I try to make sure that, you know, they know to come to class early, a little bit early, not crazy early. You know, unless you have a job to do, you come before class, enough time to stretch. Punctuality is super important, and it's the kind of thing that if you're early, you're on time, and if you're on time, you're late,
Mhm.
kind of thing. You know, but the instructor-student relationship is super important, and the boundaries that you create with the students are super important. You know, so I will sit at the front desk and say hello to them when they come in and say goodbye to them when they leave. You know, if they have a question or two, we'll usually discuss, but I try to keep it, you know, very much as when they invite me to birthday parties and things like that, I'm like, thank you, you know, have a happy birthday.
Mhm.
I'll see you on the mat, you know?
You know, I remember two very like distinct times where, you know, on Bergen line, you know, Sifu, one, you could not stay and watch the end of the night practice, right? So if once we would get there to spar with Mr. Perez himself, Mr. Padilla, and the Santin brothers, I would either take the class before, or I would get there just as that class was ending. And if you were a student in that first class, you had to change and leave before we started, and you had 10 minutes to do that, and you couldn't stay. You got yelled at and kind of tossed. And like when Mr. Vizzio comes to teach me on Thursday evenings, I tell the class, like, you gotta leave. Like, he won't start until everyone's out the door. Like, and they have no kind of concept of that. They're like, what? Like, we always hang out in the waiting area and talk and chat, and, you know, like, the school is like our home. And I'm like, no, he's not like that. Like, you gotta go. And I'll have to literally remind people, like, get out. Like, sorry, I'm not trying to be rude, but like, he's getting more and more upset with me the longer you're there. So stop it, go. And then I also remember one time that he had like thrown a student out. We were there, and a guy had come like early for class and was changing when the kids were changing.
I remember who that was.
And that guy, like, I had no context for it, but he was like, he came into the dressing room and he was like, get out. And the guy was like, what? And he was like, I've told you before, once before, now you have to leave, get out. And he threw the guy out. And that day he taught at the end of the class, the dressing room protocol. He said, you come when it's your class, and he says, your shirt goes off first, then your Kung Fu top goes on, and then your pants come off and your Kung Fu pants go on. And then you tie your belt and you go out, your sash, and you go outside. And when you come back in, you do the exact opposite. You take your pants off and then you put your regular pants on, so that like at no time are you exposed. Your Kung Fu uniform is covering you, and that's the kata for how to get changed. And I was like, wow, man, this is like very, very, very deep. This is, there's much more here going on than I even could fathom. And I don't think that people in a gym mentality, like, they don't understand these protocols that protect the dojo or the school, protect the student-teacher relationship, and protect the student-student relationship. They just don't understand it.
I have to say something about that particular instance, because I remember that, because that was a long, long time ago. My father was so ahead of his time with that kind of thing. It wasn't even an issue, like something talked about back then. We're going back probably over 35 years that with that instance.
I think
that
was
that
1988 or 89.
Yeah, it was a long time ago. So that particular student was also a very high-ranking student.
Yeah.
And I know the reason why I know this is because it took a long time for him to come back. But what happened was he was so like mortified and insulted, like he was such a high-ranking student, and for that kind of even insinuation to be put against him, he was like super offended. And didn't understand why. Like, I've been here for 30 years. What do you mean I got, but anyways, it took him a long time. And I'm talking, I didn't see that student until the 2000s at some point, because it was in my school, so, probably like 2007, 2008, that student actually wrote a letter to my father.
Wow.
Wrote a letter saying that it took him 20 something years to finally understand what my father was saying. And it wasn't that he was accusing him of anything. It was more like to protect himself, not my father, to protect that student.
Protect that student.
You're putting yourself in a bad situation. It doesn't look good for you. It definitely doesn't look good for me. And these poor kids, like, come on, man. And it was so far beyond his thinking at the time, that he wrote this whole apology letter. And I'm talking, it was like 4 pages long, front and back, to my father, and then asked for permission to come back all those years later, and actually did. And he came and he practiced with us.
Wow.
And took privates with me and all kinds of stuff afterwards. And, me and him spoke about it because I was young at the time, and he was like, he was so ahead with his thinking, back then, that it was so beyond me. Like, he was a hippie when he was growing up, and he was a yoga guy also, and then a martial artist on top of that, and thought he had it like down packed. And he was like, I was so, hurt when he said that to me. But now, years later, he's like, I completely understand. I completely appreciate it. And it took me 25 years to finally like wrap my brain around what was happening. And I'm like, well, I'm glad you're here. You know, like, I'm glad you're back. I'm glad that you spoke to Sifu. I'm glad that you understand that what he was doing was for you.
Yeah.
You know? And it's actually a really nice thing, you know, in the end. But at the time, it was like,
What do you think, like, what do you think the difference is with like the Kung Fu school and like not other martial arts schools, but like MMA gyms, if you will, or some like, I'm not trying to bash anybody, right? But like, just kind of, I want to get the conversation moving in this direction where someone who is interested in having that experience or is in a martial art environment and doesn't really understand why we do some of the things we do, like, maybe can start to consider some of this stuff more broadly, right? So what do you think like the major differences are for you?
um, and actually your particular school is actually really not that far off. You know, the people in your school, my father and I talk about it all the time, is that we're actually really proud of you and what you've done with your schools, because the people are good, you know, and that's something that I notice the most. You know, I get invited a lot to other schools and everything to come and visit and say hello, and I do. You know, I'm respectful of my elders and I'm respectful of my colleagues. You know, and I'll come and I'll visit and I'll say hello and, you know, whatever, not to train, but just to, you know, come say hello. Um, and what I notice, is the people. Most I always notice like the heart of the people. Are they good people? Are they like tough guys? Are they, you know, that's kind of that feeling, you know. And what I notice is that in some of the schools, MMA, or these like some of the rougher jujitsu schools and things like that, you know, the ones that don't practice martial art etiquette, the people are different. You know, they're oh, what's the word I'm looking for? It's like they don't have the same type of camaraderie, that family kind of feeling. Like, you know, they don't have that. They kind of come, they train, they do their thing, and they're like, and then they leave. You know, the attitude is different. You know, what I notice in the more traditional schools, meaning the ones that follow this kind of etiquette, is that the people are better. No, I shouldn't say better. That's a bad word, but, you know, like nicer all around. You feel like they're there to help you. You know, like when you come in, they're more like accepting, and they're more like, hey, you know, do you want to go over this, or let's practice this, or, you know, something like that. You'll see more of that in schools that practice etiquette. You know, um, that's just
Why do
something
you
that I've
why do
noticed.
you think that that's important, Peaches? Like, what if some, like, I'm sure there are people out there that don't want to, like, they just want to come in and like smash the pads and go home, or they want to come in and ground and pound and go home, right? Like, why is that meaningful to you as
Um,
the head of the Kung Fu school?
because I think that that kind of etiquette will lead to long time training, and long time training is where you start to get the good stuff. You'll learn so much stuff in the beginning because everything is new to you, right? um, you get lots of information, and you get, you know, you could even look really good, you know, but the real understanding, the real like grasping of knowledge, you know, we always say starts at black belt, right? That's like, you know, that's when the real training starts. It's like you're a beginner all over again. um, when you look at the other schools that don't practice that kind of etiquette, it's a quick turnaround. These people, they come, they train for, I say 10 years at most, get their black belt, and then they go, you know, because there's nothing whole, there's no nothing, no glue, and that etiquette is kind of the glue, you know.
Are you of the mind that people kind of perceive the proper protocol and etiquette as something that benefits the instructor, but is somehow a detriment to the student? Do you think there's a misperception that all of these things are put in place to somehow benefit the teacher, but
Actually,
they don't. Do you think there's a perception of that?
absolutely. So I have, this is hysterical. And I'm sorry for all my anecdotes, but I think that's the best way for people to understand, like to relate, you know? Um, so I have a really young student. He started at 3 years old. He's Russian. The parents, came from, that was grandma came from Russia. And she came into the school and she said to me one day, because I yelled at her. She's not my student. She's just the grandma of the student. Because she sat on my table. Like people would say, I have I actually took it away because people wouldn't listen. I had a couch in my reception area, and it was meant, for the business part of it, so that when you came to enroll, that you would sit on this couch with us and we would discuss, all the things of the school. And there was a coffee table, and she came and she sat on it, and I'm like, what are you doing? You don't sit on the table, And she told me, this place has more rules than Russia. And I was like in tears. I was cracking up, and I'm in the middle of class too. So like I just happened to turn and catch her doing this. And I was, teaching the kids class, and I turned around, I'm like, oh, and all the kids are like, like, what's going on? And I died laughing. Now this kid is still with me and he's phenomenal. He's only like 4.5 now, but it took a good chunk of time. I'm talking about a year before grandma really accepted what was happening in the school and why. And so, yes, to answer your question, yes, there is this perception of, why do I got to bow to you? Like, what does that do for me? Kind of feeling. But after some time, when that same etiquette translates into the real world, and the story is a super young child, but the respect now that he has for his parents and his grandparents, the kung fu training, the etiquette has translated into his little universe. And now the parents and grandma are like, whoa, we love you. We love this place. We're going to stay here forever. That kind of feeling. So yeah, it took a long time for them to accept, like, I'm sorry, you want to train here? This is what we do. There's a reason, and the other part of the etiquette, I don't know, I'm sure you remember, Dunn, because you're still with my dad, but is not to ask questions.
Yeah.
Accept what I'm telling you. You're here because you're putting some trust in your instructor, right? I'm giving you this information. Accept it. In time, it will make sense to you.
Yeah.
In time, you will understand. So that's another part of the thing that people. Well, I wanted to ask you about and I'm like, no. Come to class.
I told Tom, like, if I ask Sifu a question during the lesson, he stops and he puts on his flip-flops and he walks out the door. He's like, lesson's over, bye. He's like, the minute you ask me the question, your thinking stops. He gives me that, like, he'll tell me that, but it's really very, very interesting, because it's like what Tom was alluding to. Like, it doesn't seem beneficial to me as the student, but if you really think about it, it does have a lot of merit. Tom, can
I ask a question? Speaking of questions, I hate to contradict the idea, but why do you think your father, for example, Peaches, why did he decide to make it so difficult for himself? In other words, it would be a lot easier if he didn't hold himself and everyone else to such high standards. Like, why is it that he chose to accept the burden of making his profession, if you will, more difficult than it needs to be? Like, what is it that compelled him to embrace the idea of accepting a more difficult approach? What do you think it was?
I think it was his practice. I think he saw the difference between what was happening when he was practicing with his instructor, following these rules. And, Wei Hung came from China in the 50s, and I think he saw like, what happened with my father and his, how he got there and, was at the top of the mountain and, did everything that he did with his life came from, what he did, which was be quiet and practice. Just do what your instructor says, have some faith, and just keep going. And I think that when he started his school, that he felt like, yeah, like that's what I did to get there. So I'm going to do that for you. And he saw too, there's so much history, and it's funny because Jerry Fonten has really recently did a Zoom interview with Mr. Perez, and was talking about the history and the history of all these things that were happening in martial arts in the 70s and 80s, when really it started to have its big boom in this country, and being in those tournaments and things like that, it was rough and it was crazy. And some of the martial arts schools, they really came to like hurt somebody, and I think my father felt like, especially in those times, like, hey, we're not going to be these crazy killers, like we're not here to hurt somebody. That's not what this is, like, so I think that he took it upon himself. And I think that he noticed after the first few years, the bond that he had with these students and the trust and faith that they had in him was well worth it. And the ones that couldn't handle it, the ones that said, I ain't bowing to you, like that kind of feeling, they left and he was fine with it, because the ones that, that did stay, and I mean, there's thousands of students, thousands and thousands, are still like wonderful, respectful, amazing people. So he feels like, it was worth it.
It's so interesting because many people listening might not understand like the depth of your father's accomplishment. Before MMA existed, before the UFC existed, I mean, years and years he was doing underground fights and winning. I mean, the people from all over the world were coming to fight him. And then he went and was many time over PKA world champion. I mean, he was really the top of the heap, so to speak, in that generation and far beyond, right? He was, I know he doesn't talk about age, but he was fighting well into
easy before he listens to this.
well into his wiser years. And I got in trouble once for breaking someone's jaw in the ring. I was in a bad place, and we were kickboxing, and I hit the guy too hard and broke his jaw, and he screamed at me and told me to get out. He was like, "What are you doing? Like, I didn't teach you that. I didn't teach you to hurt someone. I'm teaching you, like, you're supposed to have dignity. You're supposed to have respect. You're supposed to have a consciousness, even though we're doing full contact." And I was that lesson, like, I didn't learn it then. I still am working on it, right? And it took years for me. But that was a very powerful lesson. That was a very, very powerful lesson. Tom, in Kung Fu, in Chinese martial arts, speaking of protocol, like, I don't think a lot of people know this, but Mr. Miyazaki was telling me that in the Tokutai Dojo, or not the Tokutai Dojo, but the Hanbu Dojo in Japan, that the student couldn't talk, the junior student could not talk to sensei. Like, you had to go through the senpai. Like, you couldn't approach, if you were under black belt, you were not allowed to talk to sensei. Like, you had to go through the senpai and present whatever question or whatever thought you had. And then it went through this like chain. And he said that like his senpais were like his brothers and sisters, like the older brothers, that relationship was really the profound one. Like you never got to sensei. Is it like that in Chinese martial arts?
Sure. You know, like some of the value, and I don't want to, again, I don't want to presume, but I would imagine that while Sifu had a rule not to ask questions in the training, I would imagine that classmate to classmate, there was a lot of questionings being asked and answered. And what's woven into the structure of a lineage is that even though Sifu is largely perceived not as a resource, but as the source, other people have value to offer as well. And if they're never put in a position where they're able to provide information and instruction, they won't. And what ends up happening is you have this dysfunctional environment where the only person who knows how to convey a thought is Sifu. So I think it's woven into the very fabric of a family style martial arts system where my 6-year-old daughter can very easily ask my 11-year-old daughter a lot of questions and get a lot of answers that will serve both of them well, particularly in their relationship. Because when I'm dead, they'll still have a functional relationship of senpai and kohai, of older sibling and younger sibling. So I think that it's not just there to prevent Shihan or Sifu from getting a headache. You know, part of it is like there's a limit to how many ridiculous questions someone really needs to be answering because it becomes endless. But that's the least of it. The least of it is shielding or protecting the master instructor from an onslaught of ridiculousness. I really think a lot of it has to do with creating functionality amongst the ranks so that to me, the most important relationship in the school is really classmate to classmate. And I really think that the lead instructor is there to help facilitate that, is there to help the students value each other more than they otherwise would. And I think that's important. I think that those relationships are lifelong lasting, or they should be. Classmate to classmate. I don't know if that answers it, but that's.
No, it's very important. I'm thinking of two things. Like, I think one of the, I've written an article probably 5 years ago now about, it was entitled Pizza and Beer.
I love that one.
That I was trying to identify the folly of being too familiar as classmates in that way. That like if all of your training with your classmates amounts to is going to, Fridays after class and getting drunk and bloated on wings, there's something wrong. Like that you need to be the type of classmate that is willing to hold yourself and the people around you to a higher standard. And, I think that article was perceived as very negative to some people, not just because I was kind of calling out certain people that were I saw doing that in the school, but I wondered to myself if it was not damaging to the senpai kohai relationship in some way, that maybe that some of that stuff does happen over pizza and beers.
It could, but it certainly needs to happen in the classroom. And it doesn't have to be verbal. Again, like you can have a policy where you don't want a lot of chatter in the class. I mean, do you guys like chatter in the class? I don't like chatter. I'm sure I could tell, Peaches, you don't like chatter. But a lot of communication is nonverbal. So again, you know, I can verbally ask you a question and you can verbally provide me with an answer, but I can also communicate my curiosity or my ignorance to my senior students, and they can communicate their competence and their intelligence back to me non-verbally. But I just think it's woven into the structure of a kun or a dojo to make sure that classmates value each other and not just the person who everybody perceives as being in charge. They have to value each other. And I think that a big part of valuing each other is not constantly approaching your instructor with superficial questions that only get superficial answers that provide no depth of education. There's no lesson in it.
You know,
So the classroom structured in a way so that much of the skill and knowledge is built through training partner and training partner,
you know,
non-verbally.
it brings me to the next point is like recently I got a text message from a student like, Professor, what does a guy got to do to sit down and have lunch with you? And I'm going to direct this to Peaches, but, and so I was like, is there something urgent? Are you okay? Like I'm expecting like someone's, heaven forbid, but someone's in the family is passing or has got cancer or something. Like, well, I can't even see another reason for that. Like, and I'm like, is everything okay? It's like, yeah, I just want to break bread, you know, with my teacher. And, you know, I politely said, you know, I'm busy. Like, it was true. I got a lot going on. It's not a lie. But I wondered to myself, like, what in the world is going on here? And like, from this like, if you look at other people, like if you look at other professors or other senseis, like they're posting a plethora of, you know, selfies with their students at the bar. You know, it's not like, it's still not in the social consciousness, this like idea, but like, Peaches, what do you think to yourself as like someone's teacher, someone's like martial art instructor? Hey, can we get some beers?
I can't even tell you how many times that I have spoken to other instructors about that exact thing. I told you before, I stay away from social things like that with my students. You know, they invite me to a birthday party, to this and that, and I'm like, oh, thank you, happy birthday. You know, I don't, you know, engage in those kinds of things. However, I have spoken to so many other instructors, you know, that you and I know very well that do this sort of thing, you know? And I think the important thing is to remember is that the cultures are very different. So although like other cultures, to break bread with someone, you know, is so important, you know, to go and have a meal and, you know, whatever, and that it means something, you know, to them. To the martial arts community, to this traditionalist community, it's insulting. You know, like I'm not going to sit with you and have a meal. That's not the relationship that we are cultivating. You know, and to have a drink even, it's like, wait, what? No. That's not what we're doing here.
You know what I find interesting is that instead of assimilating, because I've had that conversation on the mat many times. I mean, literally thousands of people have heard me say, like, listen, don't invite me to the barbecue. Like, I'm a mess. Like, I'm gonna have like barbecue sauce on my cheek. I'm gonna have like, you know, I'm gonna be playing with the dog. Like, I'm gonna be feeding it chicken bones, all kinds of things. Like, you just don't want me at your house for a barbecue. Like, I'm not going, don't invite me. Like, all kidding aside, this relationship is the one that this is the best relationship to have with me. And, you know, it's difficult for us, not in the meh way, but like it's hard. It's hard from this side. And I think this is what Tom was alluding to before. Like, to be the type of instructor that goes like, hey, wait a second. Like, no, not no because you're a bad person, or no, I don't like you, but no, because that's not what we're doing. It's hard.
Yeah,
It's not easy.
it's true. And you know, I'm sure you, because you guys have been around a long time, that you have those students that have been with you forever, you know, and you just love them, and they do everything for the school, and they do everything for the classmates, and they're just like the best people. And actually, you love them so much you would want nothing more to do that. You know, like I would love to hang out with you. You're like, you're so cool, and I love you. You're the best, inside. You know, but then when it's brought upon you, you have to be like, no. You know, there is an etiquette to follow. In my school, and I know it's part of the culture, that you go one rank higher, you know, to ask a question. You
Mhm.
don't go three ranks higher. You don't go to, you know, you don't go to the boss. My father, you know, we have these crazy analogies, right? You're famous for them too, Dunn. But my father says you don't get a parking ticket and call the president. He's like, he's gonna say, what the hell are you calling me for? You know, go, you have to go to your own police department and figure that out. There's a hierarchy, you know, and it's important, um, because you're right. It does help to, um, give the school depth. The students have to be responsible for what you're giving them. You know, I tell my kids, you know, when I give you a new form, when I teach you a new kick, when we do a new combination, it is my present to you. It is your responsibility. You know, I gift wrapped it, I put a bow on top, it's yours. If you don't go home and practice, it's like you take that thing and you throw it in the corner of the kung fu school, and you go home and you forget about it. You took my present and you threw it on the floor, you know? And the kids laugh about it, but it's good for them to understand. But I say it to the adults too. And I always tell them, I was talking to the kids about this before, but this is what I'm saying to you. Um, when you give them something and they practice it, it becomes their responsibility. If the lower, you know, little brother, little sister doesn't come to them and ask them, you know, what was that thing that we did, or can you help me with that, they're no longer responsible for it.
Mm.
So you kind of lose that. And I think, I'm sure you've experienced this as well. When you teach something, you get a better understanding of it too.
Yes.
You can't just learn it in one way. People learn in different ways. So I have to learn every single thing that I do 100 different ways so I can better help my students grasp it in the way that they can, you know? And my experience is also different. I didn't grow up in a gang like my father.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't have that life. I did grow up in Union City. It was still pretty tough. And it's also different than the way that my daughter grows up here in Mount Olive. You
Yeah.
know, like they're not allowed to even have words with each other anymore. So, you know, like everybody's experience is different, you know? So you have to, that's part of why you don't go to the president to get
You
out
know,
of a parking ticket.
it's really interesting because I think some people hear that message and some very subtle point in them goes, no, I want it the way I want it. And I'm going to do everything I can to get it like what everybody else is doing.
And I pay for it. I'm
And
paying for this.
I pay
I
for,
pay for it. I pay you.
you know, Tom and I talk about this all the time. Like, you know, and I think that that's our responsibility on the other side of this, is that like, if we're not giving 10 times the value, then we're not actually doing our part. But, you know,
So
well, I just want to say, like, don't, like, I wouldn't dream of walking into like a fine restaurant and going like, can you make me a McDonald's hamburger? Like, I'm not interested in that. I'm here for this experience. And if I want to go to McDonald's, I'll go to McDonald's. Go to McDonald's. If you don't want to have this martial art experience, and I don't want to sound mean, but like, it just doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't make sense. Like, and I had to learn that lesson very, very difficult in the Miyazaki organization. It was it was a very difficult lesson. But like, stop trying to turn it into something else that it's not going to be. Go ahead,
Yes.
Tom.
Peaches, what are, I mean, I'm sure you took everything that your father told you and taught you without any skepticism or doubt as a, but if there was a few, like one or two things that took you longer, perhaps when you're responsible for the school now, you run the school now
I have my own
yourself,
school now.
you have your own school now. So can you think of a few things that you didn't quite appreciate, like you didn't really get it, maybe it was, you thought it was a little too much, too extreme, that when you had your own school after a very short period of time, you kind of said, aha. Are there a few things that jump out?
A few? Oh my God. I could talk about that for 40 years. So you, the hardest thing I think is that my instructor is my father. And with all of this etiquette and all of this stuff that we had to do in the school and treat him or whatever, was hard, does not describe what it was. And he's different now. He's a lot older, just kidding. I'm just kidding, Dad. He's 29. But I mean, like, my father felt,
The guy
oh my
still
God.
moves like he's 29. He can
Yes,
kick
he
the crap
does.
out of me. Like
He still kicks the crap out of me too.
yeah. Go
Um,
ahead. Sorry.
but it's okay. My father says kung fu on and off the mat. That's just what it is. So whatever etiquette and respect and things that you're following, that you're doing on the mat, is the same thing off the mat. And he followed that rule. My father specifically follows that rule like the strictest. So I didn't have Dad at home. I had Sifu at home. It was torture. And I am a rebel. I'm outspoken. I'm crazy. I'm the party animal. That's me. That's my personality. And oh my God, me and my father butt heads pretty much my whole life. My whole life. I fought everything that he gave me. Everything. He said sit, I stood. He said move, I stayed still. He said jump, I sat down. It was very hard for me. And the funny thing is, out of all of my family, I'm the one that opened the school.
You're the one that's
It
going
was
to
me.
over the style too.
But it's the funniest thing to me because I fought it the hardest. My sister number 2, the one that came right after me, drinks everything my father says in, copies every move, everything, writes everything down, but she refuses to open a school, and she has her reasons and whatever. But the way I look at it is, I struggled the most to grasp, what he was putting down.
And
But I love
that's in lies the value, doesn't it?
Exactly. I wasn't allowed to ask questions. I just had to stay there. And I didn't have a choice about practicing either. He would grab me by my hair and throw me on the mat, literally kicking and screaming. And I got beat up constantly. Oh my God. Oh, torture. But anyways, kicking and screaming through training. And I'm the one that opened the school. So what that tells me in retrospect, in reflection, is that I had struggled so much to hear what he was telling me. And I can't even say within maybe 2 or 3 months of having a school, 2 or 3 months, all of a sudden it was like, ching, like, the sun came on, the windows were opened, and I was like, oh, this is why, this is exactly why. I started to understand it even when I had kids, just having kids, made me like, oh, all right, I got it, but like, just everything from the relationship with the students to even the etiquette.
What's one thing that you got from, like, in the realm of having kids that Kung Fu and the etiquette gave you, that had you not had that, you maybe wouldn't have dawned on you? What's like one really important thing there? Kung Fu on and off the mat. So
Yeah, it's definitely the actual relationship with my kids. I'm not their friend. I'm their mom.
Mhm.
You know, and my job is to give them these boundaries, these rules to follow. And if you don't follow them, you know, you're in trouble. And the guidelines are very clear, the boundaries are clear, and the punishments are very clear. You know, and it has helped me as a parent, you know, tremendously. Me and my kids, we have a great, you know, Dunn, we have a great relationship. And when they screw up, they pay. You know,
they're fine kids. They're good kids.
thank goodness. You know, they are good kids. They do well in school. They are respectful. They are polite. They are helpful. You know, they are good kids. And I always say, always, it's because of my martial arts training. When I talk to other parents and, you know, issues that are happening and things that are going on, you know, I just recently had a conversation with a parent that, you know, you're not their friend, you're their parent. You know, like if you don't give clear rules and guidelines for them to follow, it makes their lives very hectic. They don't know what's expected of them. You know, how are they supposed to perform to what you want them to? I think martial arts is the same. You know, the reason why these rules and this etiquette is so important is because it tells you exactly what lane to drive in. You know, can you imagine roads without the lanes and without the rules? It'd be chaos, you know, and that's the same thing with your martial arts training. You come into a school, the very first thing that I do anyway is tell them we bow when we enter and when we leave. We answer when spoken to. There's no talking on the mat. Like they have this whole rundown of the rules. So you know exactly what I want from you. There's no question about it. There's no, I don't know if I'm supposed to, or should I? No, this is what it is. Do this and you will excel. The end.
So do you find that in the beginning, you know, I like easy. Like I like easy. I like fast. I like, you know, the illusion of easy and fast. But when the method is strict and structured, it's not easy. But do you agree that it's easier? In other words, it's not
Absolutely.
easy, but it's easier. It's arguably impossible without it. Like I always wonder how people can navigate their way through the martial arts over a lifetime without structure, without it being systematic, without, I don't want to just use the word protocol and customs and traditions in a trivial way, but that there is something of a roadmap. And the idea of being able to navigate your way through without it, it seems impossible. I mean, what do you think about that, Gene? Do you think that could you do it without? Do you think? Forget about you. Forget about me. Do you think a person could navigate their way through the martial arts over a lifetime without some kind of a code
Look,
that they're consciously following? Do you think anybody does? See, I know a lot of guys who don't teach it, but they themselves had a method.
yeah, look, I'll say this. This is how my practice is transcending into another area, right? So I think that part of my martial arts practice actually is what you said, the five, what did you call them? The five disciplines?
The five excellences.
The five excellences. So, right. So I do art every day. And I absolutely use the methodology that I was taught in the martial arts. Like I get up, I do a warm up, I have all my tools sharpened, and my practices, it has a structure, it has a protocol, it follows a path. And one would argue that like that's a very sterile and stale approach. But what I find is, my gosh, the progress is just keeps getting stacked up on itself, right? Like if I look back in the last 6 months, things have just been like, and why I say that to you is I have a friend who is a writer, and this friend writes screenplays, has written books, is an editor of a very, very famous magazine. And this person will comment on how disciplined I am and start to compare that to, she finds it difficult sometimes. She has what they call writer's block. And how I perceive that is that there is not a regimented, structured protocol, a pathway that's laid out
to induce the state of consciousness called creativity.
There it is. And what people do is they go, nah, that's sterile, that's stale, but it's an excuse to not sit down and put your darn pen to the paper, or put your pencil to the paper, or put your gi on, tie your sash or your belt, and get yourself on that mat, and you put your feet together, and you put your fingertips together, and you bow from your hips, and it's down fast and it's up slow, and you say the words properly, and you do the exercises to the best of your ability properly, and you engage in a certain way while you're at the dojo, before you come in and after you leave. And it's all to induce this kind of certainty. And inside of that is where, and I think this is Peach's, what she's getting at, what you're getting at, what Sifu is getting at. Inside of that is where all of, in quotations, the magic happens. It doesn't.
Or it can't.
Or it can't.
It can't happen. It can't happen consistently. It can happen haphazardly once in a while, but that's not a discipline. That's like a happy accident.
This quote, creativity isn't stoked by boundless freedom, but instead by tight constraints. Good.
Yeah, so another thing that speaks to that idea is that the variety is found in the certainty. Everybody's looking for a different way of doing it, but try doing it 10 times, each time better than the last. And what you'll find is a lot more variety than consistency. Like try throwing the dart into the bullseye in the dartboard 5 times in a row. Good luck. What you'll find is in an effort to do it exactly the same way, to go for perfect, is a plethora of variety. But ironically, when you go for variety only, you usually end up with monotony and boredom. So it's this idea of pursuing the perfect that provides you with all these other that have value, the other experiences of less than perfect. There's a lot of lessons there, but you won't perceive the less than perfect unless you're going for the absolute. You just won't appreciate it.
Mrs. Vizzio, I'm going to call her Mrs. Vizzio for the moment, Miss Vizzio. But she's been trying to teach me this form for 2 years, man. 2 years. And she's like, no, do it again. No, do it again. Nope, do it again. Do it again. Try it like this. This is what I showed you last time. Nope, do it again. I mean, it's like, and never mind variety, man. Like, it's so hard for me to wrap my head around the totality of the form. that it feels like a lifetime. Like, and
Rich.
it's rich. It's filthy rich, bro. It's like Scrooge McDuck diving into a pile of gold. Like I'm like swimming in it, man. And
The
it's
gluttony of abundance.
it's not even a long form. It's not even a long form. Like if she was like, oh, okay, I'm going to show you 5 different variations on this form, I wouldn't be able to even, like, no way. And she's got them, but you know, the best way to teach someone nothing is to show them everything. It's just like, you can't do it. Peaches, what's your
Can
thought?
I ask Peaches a question? Because you get to speak to her on a regular basis. Can I ask a question? So, Peaches, what, aside from yourself, how many of your dad's students have schools? Not necessarily Fujianpai schools, but like Gene is a student of your father's who has a martial arts school. Does your father have a lot of students who have schools of their own? Handful?
Not a lot. Not a lot. A handful.
A handful. How many have gone on to teach Fujianpai besides yourself? Under your dad?
Me.
Just you? Have
just
others asked? Have others tried, or they didn't even? What's the?
No. No.
So
no.
That's my next question. Is this? What are the 1 or 2 or 3 things? There's probably a lot more, but what 1 or 2 or 3 things jump out at you that anyone who's spent a decade or more with your dad, like, what is it that you think they have in common in their character? Is there something that you like can put your finger on that identifies them as a student of Sifu's? The decade or more people.
Oh yeah, but the funny thing is, what I love about what we're doing as far as it like working, is that the people that train, most of them, it's for a lifetime. Like we have this thing that, like, once they pass this certain rank, for us is some cup, it's their 3rd rank. There's only 5, so their 3rd rank, we always say they're going to be here forever. They'll be here forever once you pass this rank. And they might not be in the capacity where they were training every day like before, but they're always around. They're at every event. They come to class once in a while. Like, they're still in the system. So the longevity that we have in this particular way that we're doing it is just amazing. What I do notice the most about the students that practice is their generosity. First, I can't describe how it happens, but all these people that have come to this school will literally take the shirt off their back and give it to a stranger. And I don't know why it is. I don't see it many other places. I don't know, maybe they feel like gifted or endowed or something, that they have to give back something. That's kind of like my thought anyway. Like, I just feel like I need to give back something, because how could I be this wealthy, with this and be so in love with what I do and what I have? How can I be so blessed, that I have to give something back? And I think that's where it all stems from, whether they even realize it or not. But the generosity of the people that we have it's just amazing, and Dunn being one of them.
Thank
So
you.
your father, among people who know of him, certainly they recognize and admire and acknowledge his prowess. He's capable of hurting people. There's no doubt about it. He's capable of hurting people. There's just you can't argue that. But the people who know him best, like, what do you think their perception of him is? Is he known for whom he's hurt, or who he's helped? What do you think?
Mr. Dunn said it before. It's dad. the funny thing is we're talking about, how we have this hierarchy and don't talk to the main instructor and this and that. But at the end of all, and I shouldn't even say at the end, after long time training, all these people, if you talk to anybody, they consider him dad. They love him like a father, and he treats them like their children, like his children.
You know, Tom, like I've talked to you about this, and I wanted to contribute something on this other side. I think that like my classmates, my Fujao classmates from that period of time, all still keep a tab on me. They all still check in on me, or I will do the same for some of them that like were in the classroom with me. And I think that that's one of the things that he gave us all, is a sense of family in a way, right? Like we may not talk, but like if you need something, or if I want to, I'm making sure you're good, and that's enough. And there is a sense in which I think he has a paternal, fatherly kind of way. And, Tom, I said this to you a few times, like it took me forever to understand Sifu. Like it was like an assault on everything that I thought I knew. And he still does. He challenges it every step of the way. Every interaction is very, very challenging. But once you get him, if you get it, right? Like, and I don't mean that like you get the lessons, you just understand like his intention. It like goes like this. Like, and I think that that's what Peaches was saying about opening up the dojo. She was like, the sun came out and the windows came open and I could breathe. Like, I was like, oh, now I get this. I understand what the master is getting at. And I just gotta get, like, I gotta be in that lane. And I'm on this really, really terrific, magnificent, colorful ride. And it's full of lessons, and it's a deep love. That guy is really loving, but it's not the way that most people are used to digesting it.
Right. It's not hugs and kisses.
It's
not even for me.
It's a whole other thing. Mr. Miyazaki told me in probably 88 or 89, like, Mr. Vizzio is more Chinese than Chinese people are Chinese. Like, he just holds the lessons so tight and so dear. He won't, they're immovable. They're like, they're monuments, and he enforces them. I'm sorry, I went on a long.
Oh, that was funny.
All right.
His relationship with Wei Hong, how do you frame it? How do you categorize it? What have you noticed? I mean, you grew up observing it, and you have a relationship with him as well. How would you classify or categorize their interaction?
It's so funny, because of who my father is, I guess, and because of everything, and it's their history and his bonds with these people. It's so funny because I have to really separate two different relationships between a lot of these people. So like Miyazaki Sensei, he's my godfather. He's like he's like my uncle. He's like, whatever. And when he is in my home, I can treat him that way, and and it's still with the utmost respect, but it's a little different because he's a different kind of guy too. He's more huggy than that my dad is like, don't touch me.
Your family.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. In my home,
It wasn't like that with the students.
Right. No. In my home. But then in the dojo, or in the kun, it's you don't touch them and you don't talk to them, and there's nothing special, no special treatment. I mean, between me and them, it's I'm a student like everybody else, and that's it. Right, very, very formal. And my father with Sikong, the grandmaster, I have spoken to him. Sikong has told me so many stories, of my father growing up, because my father won't tell me, so I have to get it from other people. But Sikong will tell me all these stories. Sikong looks at my father as his son, and my father looks at him and his father. However, my father to this day, when he sees him, will bow first, won't say a word. They don't even speak. He sits next to him, like almost like he's his bodyguard, just and quietly. People come over and try to like put his hand on his shoulder, and my father would be like, don't say a word, just pushes the hand away, like, before it gets there. Like, you don't touch Sifu, like you just don't. Like things like that. And you just watch. And every once in a while, I'll see the grandmaster lean over and kind of very quietly, almost a whisper, say something to my father. And my father will lean back and say something back. And then it's just silence. They just sit there together. We're all training or we're doing whatever we're doing. And they just sit together. That's it. But the bond is so strong. It's so strong that,
Reverence.
Oh my goodness. Oh, it's just insane. And to sit there, you can see it. There's no words being spoken, but you can see that, like my father would do anything for the grandmaster.
I don't know if this will make it on. We might chop it, but I remember walking down the street with my karate instructor the summer of like 1989 or 1990, and a carload of kids with the windows down rolled down Steinway Street and sprayed my instructor with a super soaker. Like I pulled the kids out of the car. I was furious. And we were fighting, and the cops that knew me from the karate school rolled up and arrested everybody. But like this sense of protection, the sense of like gratitude that's so deep. Like I don't think people have a concept of that for their martial arts teacher. They don't understand that per se. And I think that that's one of the important things about the conversation. Not that I would get into a fight or someone should get into a fight to protect their instructor, but that level of love and care. And, on the other side of it, I think that the instructor has to warrant that. They have to be the type of person that moves through the world to develop that level of a relationship. Tom, your thought?
Do you think that Sigong, there must have been a lot of people who, if he allowed the feeling, he must have had a lot of people come through the doors in Chinatown and disappoint him, where your father was far from a disappointment, obviously. It'd be very difficult probably to put a number on the people who missed the opportunity. In other words, your father did not miss the opportunity. Your father saw what was before him. He saw what was possible and what he would be able to get from the relationship with his teacher. And that he, in order to get what he needed to get, he also needed to give it away. He needed to teach it. He needed to pass it on. He needed to but I bet there weren't many. Does your father ever speak of like how many of his brothers and sisters growing up in the Kun went on to spread the art? Do you have any idea of like who he considers to be his peer group?
Yeah, there are seven.
Out of how many?
Hundreds of thousands.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Didn't you send me that? Someone sent me a picture of your dad teaching. Maybe there was maybe 150 people out
in the park.
Manhattan Bridge, right under the Manhattan Bridge.
right over the Manhattan Bridge.
Yeah, that's where they used to practice outdoors when the school was too hot. There used to be a big concrete area under the Manhattan Bridge, years ago. So yeah, they used to have outdoor classes out there.
And that was
Um,
7 a.m. class.
it's so amazing, right? How the martial arts have had to evolve to survive business wise. I always think about um, like the history, even the history of tuition. Like where does tuition come from? How come all of a sudden now we have this scheduled tuition and whatever? It didn't used to be that way. Students in China would support their instructor because they felt like he should be supported. He's giving away something. They didn't expect their instructor to have a job. They felt the need to supply the food and housing for their instructor and the instructor's family. That's just what they felt they needed to do. And now we have to have these tuition things, and people are fighting with us over cost or over like their entitlement because they pay tuition. The roles have reversed and stuff. It's just strange. And the same thing with class time. We have to cater to the working schedule now of everybody and things like that. And it's just a different idea where martial arts came from, to what we have to do now. However, my father's seniors, his were senior students, there are 7 of them. And if you go back into Fujia's history, each instructor would only in China teach 2 disciples. When Sikong came to this country, he took on 7. He had a different idea when he brought kung fu into the United States, on what he wanted to do. He wanted something bigger, and he wanted it to be available to everybody, not just the Chinese, because that was a big thing. And that's what my father fought for. And that's part of my father's history, is to allow, everybody to practice. And he had to literally fight for that right. But when you ask him, who are his seniors or whatever, there are 7. I can name them. I knew them growing up, and some of them have passed on now. But there are 7, not the hundreds that came through the door at the same time. There are 7.
7 it. Including him, or him and 6 more, or is it 8 total?
No. There are 7 of his seniors.
Seniors. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And that's
it.
That's it. And then, as far as for like on his level, let me think. That came at the same time as him, meaning on his level. Like he considers, his classmate, his colleague. I think there are 3 that I know. Like that's it. And there's thousands that came through the doors at the same time, but it's not the ones that stayed.
Thomas, I want to ask one question from a friend, and then I'd like everybody to kind of maybe come up with one thought for the student-teacher relationship, on either end, on how to be a better instructor or how to be a better student. But a friend's question is, how do students approach an instructor with a question or request, like training in another martial art? What's the etiquette? What's the etiquette of like student coming to the instructor and saying, listen, I want to train in another martial art? Peaches?
Well, I think we kind of covered that in the very beginning, right? They should, not like during office hours, not through text or calling on your personal cell phone, or, asking you out to dinner to discuss it. Go to the office and sit down and speak to you about it. Ask permission. That's the thing that I think a lot of people have a hard time with, is that they have to ask permission. Like, who are you? I pay you. You work for me. I have to ask you permission to go do something else, but really, that's what they should do. They should sit and ask their instructor explain why and how and whatever, 9 times out of 10, the instructor will say, of course, go ahead. It's just the respect that, the instructor is looking for, that you speak to them about it first, before you go and do something else. Just sit and be open about it.
From the Kung Fu perspective, right? That's really, this is a martial art kind of perspective. Tom, what's your thought?
The formal way, like formally,
Yeah.
the most formal way would be a written letter.
Uh-huh.
And then there would be a written letter from the person's current instructor to the other instructor.
Mm-hmm.
It'd be a very formal process as I understand it.
Mm-hmm.
I like to be completely transparent, is not to say that in the days of old when the knights were bold and, make it like it was so much rougher at one period of time, but there was a period of time when if you went to the other school, you're likely to come back with some broken bones.
Mm-hmm.
Not broken bones because of what you did, but there's just the potential for a lot of problems that I don't know if they're always appreciated or anticipated. And I think that's one of the challenges that was inherent in people moving from school to school in a casual and cavalier way. It invited misunderstanding, and misunderstanding could lead to some dislocation.
Mm-hmm.
and things like that. And what I like today is I like the lesson to be learned. As I have kids, and I don't want them to get hurt, but I want my son to fall off his skateboard and break his elbow. Mm-hmm. Because I don't want him to fall off his motorcycle and break his neck. Mm-hmm. So I just personally believe that there are some lessons that are best learned through experience. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that means that they're not coming back to the school. Mm-hmm. There are some infractions and some violations that can end up in expulsion or permanent dismissal. Mm-hmm. But I still think it's worth it. And I really say that from a perspective of love. Mm-hmm. I love my kids. Like when people hear me say, I want my son to fall off his skateboard or his bicycle and break his elbow so he doesn't fall off a motorcycle and break his neck, they often look at you like you're insane. Mm-hmm. But I stick to my story. Like, I think the lessons are often best learned experientially. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if that answers it for a Frim or not, but go ahead. I'm sorry, Peaches.
It's okay. No, not at all. I think that's a great point, actually. But I wanted to touch also on, continuing this etiquette, is that when they come to you and ask permission, that's not the end of the situation. When I get a student from another school, it's one of the first things we ask, I think all of us, right? Like, have you ever practiced before? And if they come back to me and say, well, yeah, I practice right now, I do karate down the street or whatever. I always let them know right away that I'm going to call your instructor. That etiquette doesn't end with you asking permission. When you ask me, it was when you ask me, like, can I go practice at this guy's school? I'm waiting for a phone call now, and the funny thing is, most of them never come.
Yeah.
However, I tell anybody that walks in my school that practices somewhere else, I'm going to call your instructor. I'm just letting you know ahead of time. I'm going to make sure that this is okay. This is not normal. Training in multiple locations is not normal, and I let them know that. And I understand the love for martial arts. Hello, it's me too. I absolutely do go and practice in Miyazaki Sensei's school. I absolutely go to Mr. Dunn's school, with permission and with their knowing. However, that's my uncle and this is my brother. My situation is slightly different, but I still do it the same way as everybody else. I ask my father permission. My father knows that, talks to Miyazaki Sensei, talks to Dunn, and it's all open communication, and I think it's important for students to know that if they come to me and say, can I practice somewhere else? And I give permission that I'm going to speak to that other instructor, because they usually don't call me anymore. It
Yeah.
used to be back in the day, yes, absolutely. I got a phone call. Hey, I have your student here. Do you know your student is here? But now the other instances, they don't call. I'd make the phone call. I'd be like,
Yeah.
hey,
Many times I won't let someone practice. Like I'll say they need their instructor's permission. They look at me like I got two heads. Like, what are you talking about? Or like if they want to drop in and for a class, like, no, man, like I don't do that. Like the jujitsu community has no clue about that. Look, I think at the end of the day, what we're trying to say is if you value the relationship with the school and your teacher, or if you value the relationship with your student, there needs to be protocol. There needs to be a system in place. And Tom, what's your final thought on that? What's something you'd like to share that might be valuable for either the teacher or the student in this conversation?
I think at the heart of every custom and tradition of protocol and etiquette in the martial arts, the genesis of it is again, not to make it easy, because it's never going to be easy, but it makes it easier. It makes the process more effective, more efficient, more functional. I think there is the concern of safety in mind, physical safety, and the preservation of people's dignity and honor. There are a whole bunch of things at play. There's the thing where if I'm a jujitsu student and I go train jujitsu in somebody else's academy, it would be very disrespectful, disingenuous, and inaccurate for me to somehow blame my inadequacies, deficiencies, and flaws on the school from where I come from. But there's a propensity to do that, to not take individual responsibility and outwardly have your inadequacies blamed on where you came from rather than owning them yourself. In other words, like, I'll personalize it. If I trained with Gene for 5 years and I came to you, Peaches, and Gene gave me permission to study Fujao Pai under you when you accepted me as a student, you'd probably notice right away that I have a lot of inadequacies, deficiencies, and flaws. But it wouldn't have been Gene's fault. They're Tom's fault. And Gene did his best to provide me with solutions to my problems and training methods to correct my inadequacies. And you would, of course, do the same. But at the end of those next 5 years, I'd still have some. And they just wouldn't be your fault. They wouldn't be Gene and Peach's fault. They'd be my fault ultimately. In other words, not that you guys wouldn't, in your heart of hearts, want to take responsibility for my skill, but at the end of the day, you can't take full responsibility for my skill. I have to take full responsibility for my skill and for my lack thereof. But I think that that's an idea that's largely misunderstood by someone who's looking to buy their martial arts in a hurry. And if what they're looking to do is buy their martial arts in a hurry rather than build their martial arts over a lifetime, it just leads to a lot of hard feelings. And that's probably not what you wanted in a summary of.
Oh, it's good. It's advice. Good. Peaches.
But yeah, it can't be bought, and it really can't even be taught. It can be earned and it can be learned. We try to teach it. I mean, your dad's taught a lot of people, but here you are, the one with the kun, the one. I'm not saying that the others didn't learn lessons, but if your dad had a magic wand, they perhaps would have learned more. But they learned what it was that they were capable of learning at the age that they were at. And clearly this and you understand this, but I think it's often misperceived and misunderstood. And I certainly would rather blame my coach when I lose than blame myself if I have arrested development. Now, the coach is going to often blame himself or herself, but ultimately, it's the person needs to accept ownership for the kung fu or the karate that they're developing, fully recognizing all the influences in their lives. But I just think those those protocols are put into place to minimize the misunderstanding.
Peaches, final thought here. Like, what's one thing that you'd like the student or the instructor to get from this conversation?
What I think is most important, cattail. What I think is most important is that when you sign up when you enroll in martial arts as a student, what you really need to understand is that what you are signing is a promise of faith in your instructor. I'm going to have faith that all these things that you're telling me to do are for my benefit and for the benefit of everyone else around me. I think it's really important that, we went off on so many tangents, like on training elsewhere, this and that, but really the etiquette, the etiquette of the school will lead to the functionality of the student. I know that, bowing, like, why? I have a kickboxer that says, why do you have to bow? There's so much involved in that. It's not just a respect thing. It also, brings you down, for a second. Hold on, get out of your head for 1 second and just open your mind to what's coming. It's getting ready. It's a preparation. It's not just respect. I think it's important to remember that faith that you put in your instructor, it shouldn't be given lightly either. You should go in and do your research. We have Google, for God's sakes, use it, do some research, know who that what school you're going to, know who you're going to train under. When you meet that person, meet that instructor, do you feel like you guys can have a connection? It's important. Don't just go, hey, the school is the most convenient, it's on the corner, so this will be fastest way for me to get there. So when you're signing up your kids, that shouldn't be convenience, shouldn't be it. You're putting a lot of faith in your instructor, whether it's for your child or for yourself. That whatever they have you doing in that school, whether it's cleaning the mat, on your hands and knees, which we still do after class, cleaning the bathrooms, or kicking and punching, or, sitting in meditation, whatever it is, that we're doing it for you. You're not cleaning the bathroom because I don't want to do it at the end of the day. That's not what this is about, and I think that's really hard for people to grasp at this day and age, where we're getting Facebook videos of why children in Japan clean their school, and the parents are like, oh, don't they have a janitor? I think it's important that they, as a student, you understand that contract is not about money, it's about faith, and as an instructor, I think it's important, beyond important, to have strict boundaries and guidelines and rules and etiquette in the school. It stops people from having miscommunications, misunderstandings, getting offended, fights within each other, within the school, or with the instructor, hard feelings, things like that. If it's clear and it is given to you as soon as you walk in the door, because it's part of what I do, definitely. I walk them through and I say, this is what I expect, this is what I want, whatever. And of course, a lot of it comes, through practice. But the main stuff, the which I think is key, I go over right at the beginning. There's no talking on the mat. You only answer to the instructor. It's I see fu, I see hing, I see der, and that's it. There's nothing else. I don't want to hear anything else. And it's like, oh, but what it, that's it. It'll come. And I think it's important as the instructor to make sure that whatever you think is most important for your school is put out right from the beginning. That way there is no misunderstanding. I told you when we signed this contract, this is what I expect from you. You don't like it? Okay, no problem. There's the door. That's it. And I think if it's so clear from the beginning on both ends and there's an understanding, the training just comes and excellence follows. It's a recipe for excellence. That's it.